Bianca Santos. You want to introduce yourself, Bianca? We are kind of the team tandem for clinical trials in our department.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. So as you said, I'm Bianca Santos. I am the research project manager at the CyberKnife Center. Essentially, I control or I take over a lot of the clinical research that comes in through the CyberKnife Center, as well as our center out in Mineola, Long Island. So anything that's research related sort of comes to me, and I help Dr. Lischalk with any research patients.
Yeah, so Bianca's really a ton of experience with clinical trials and kind of doing everything from soup to nuts in terms of creating protocols that we'll talk about, and also enrolling patients. And so we'll kind of give this lecture in tandem. We'll go through a number of slides to give everyone a little bit of a background when so we understand the language around clinical trials. And please feel free to interrupt. I think I already see some chat messages, but we'll try to make this as relaxed as possible. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. So, in talking with Aaron and Bianca, we thought that putting together a lecture or kind of a conversation about what clinical trials are, because it is a black box for a lot of folks, including patients, and we can kind of describe it from our angle, and we're going to do this by going through some examples, in particular, one of the trials that Bianca and I both run. But I think this gives a good example of what you can kind of expect when you're looking at any research trial. So let's get started. Okay, so what are clinical trials and why do people participate in them? A lot of the early slides here you can find on a website that I'll give to Aaron at the end. It's called NIH Clinical Trials and You. It's a really, really great resource that goes through from the very beginning to the very end of what questions you can ask, what some of the words that are used in clinical trials, why do we conduct clinical trials, and the types of clinical trials, I mean, even preclinical studies that are done. So it's essentially a way that helps doctors and researchers understand more about a disease and understand a better way to treat that disease. In my case, I'm a radiation oncologist, and so what my primary research focus is in improving cancer treatment outcomes. And so we do that with clinical trials. But there are a number of other ways to conduct research. And you can see that they're separated here into 4 bullet points. Epidemiological research, behavioral research, health services research, and then clinical trial research here at the bottom, which really focuses on improving interventions and health outcomes for patients undergoing treatment. But there is a broad variety of trials out there. So when you're approached to consider clinical trial, what is the rationale for taking part in a study like this? Well, this is really where the needle is moved forward in a lot of medical sites, not just oncology, but other internal medicine, surgery. Clinical trials really are the backbone of moving the medical field forward. And this is both from a treatment standpoint, but also from a prevention standpoint, a detection standpoint, also just kind of optimizing treatment to figure out the best way to minimize side effects for certain types of treatment. So clinical trials can take the form of utilizing new drugs or combination of drugs. They can be ways of delivering new surgeries. A lot of new surgical techniques include using robots and laparoscopic approaches to minimize the complications of surgery. So those are examples of new ways to do surgery. There's new medical devices. In radiation oncology, we use a lot of different medical machines and medical devices to kind of deliver radiation to cure cancers. And as one of those new machines or devices comes onto the market, you can use a clinical trial to see how well it works. There's, of course, ways to improve upon existing treatments. There's ways to improve quality of life as well. So I talk a lot about improving cancer outcomes for oncology patients, but also for treatment of cancers that are already really well treated, or meaning that the outcomes are very, very good. A lot of the times what we're trying to do now is to minimize the side effects and improve the quality of life for patients who undergo those treatments. And so this is kind of a overview of what we're trying to achieve with a variety of different clinical trials. Before I move on to the next slide, Bianca, did you want to add anything, or does anybody have any questions kind of about the background here? So what are clinical trial protocols? So you probably have heard this word used once or twice, at least if you have some familiarity with participating in a clinical trial. What is a protocol? Well, before any clinical trial is offered to a patient, there's a huge process beforehand that goes from soup to nuts in terms of how you're going to deliver that protocol, the safety of it. And this includes a lot of different people. So at a large academic center like NYU, we create clinical trial protocols that essentially are very detailed, long documents or Word documents that include the variety of ways you're going to deliver treatment and what patients you want to deliver these treatments. And so a protocol is sometimes a 50 to 100-page document that sometimes dozens of people are responsible for creating, that describes the goals of the study, also very intricately describes who's eligible to participate in that trial. So for using cancer as another example, for patients that have trials available for lung cancer, you want to describe what type of lung cancer, what stage of lung cancer, what types of patients who have lung cancer should be able to participate. So there's a lot of eligibility that's taken into consideration. There's a ton of time that's taken into figuring out how to minimize risks and maximize benefits. That's really critical. And that's also an important thing to ask whenever you're offered a participation in a clinical trial. There's a variety of tests and procedures and treatment descriptions that go through this protocol as well. Important information about what length of treatment looks like, and also the follow-up. Oftentimes, clinical trials allow a patient to participate in very detailed follow-up. And so there's a lot of members of a team that are involved in following patients closely to make sure that the trial is working well and there's not anything unexpected that is happening. The clinical trial is led by a principal investigator. So this is typically a researcher or a physician that is putting together this protocol, but has a number of different team members. And so, as I already mentioned, Bianca's part of our team here in the radiation oncology department, who regularly monitor everybody that's on that trial, anybody that's actually considering the trial, and then those that have undergone the treatment and are now in follow-up. So there's a lot of members of the team. It includes a number of different departments within a clinical trial office that monitor the data collection and the safety. And so this is really something that it takes a lot of different participants to monitor. Bianca, did you want to kind of describe maybe a couple of the different committees that are involved in a clinical trials delivery? PRMC, CTO?
Sure. So in NYU, we do have a CTO department, just a clinical trials office. And there, through that office, we actually have different groups of data coordinators, clinical research coordinators, research nurses, and it definitely takes all of us essentially to deliver the best care to our research patients. They are usually, the research team is usually there to help you throughout the entire process, from the consult visit when you're speaking to your specialist or your oncologist, all the way through to all of your follow-up visits. We are essentially just extra personnel for you to be in contact with in case you have any questions along the way. So aside from CTO, we also have the IRB, who essentially their main focus is to put your care and your safety first. So nothing can really get done with our clinical trials without their approval, which is really good because it's essentially a safety check to make sure that your care is our first priority. In the same light, we also have PDMU, which is our protocol development team. They look over our protocol to make sure, again, that safety is the first priority. And if they do have any amendments, they also help with developing those amendments to make sure that everything, again, is safe for treatment.
So there are a lot of different folks and committees that are involved in making sure that a clinical trial is safe and being delivered as the protocol kind of intended. One of the really important steps before a patient decides to join a clinical trial is informed consent. And this is actually a lot of very detailed paperwork. It's typically a conversation with the physician as well as a research team member, where they go through in a lot of detail the purpose of the study, the duration of the study, the risks and the benefits. This is really so that people have informed consent as to what they're participating in. And then once the whole team kind of sits down with the patient, there's a document that's signed, and then typically things are moved forward. So what should a patient be thinking about if they want to participate in a clinical trial? The big things to consider are the potential benefits, and then of course the risks. There's of course a broader importance to participating in trials, which is helping contribute to knowledge, improve treatments for not just yourself, but also the patients that are also going through this type of diagnosis. It also allows you access to new research treatments before they're widely available. You know, in oncology, we typically use the term standard of care, and a standard of care has been kind of established by a lot of many years and a lot of different research protocols that have kind of established what is the standard for a given stage of cancer in a given site. And to change that standard of care, because you're using research to establish it, it requires additional studies to explore and to be compared to a current standard to see if they're better and if that new protocol might be the best way to move forward, and becomes a new standard of care. And so within science and medicine, things are always changing, and they're always changing because we are conducting these clinical trials. So again, we talked about medical attention and the big research team here and all the other health professionals that are involved. So there's a lot of benefits here to having a big team have your back for this treatment. But of course, because this a lot of the times involves new drugs, new devices, there are risks. There might be differences in the side effects or the risks or the toxicity associated with this new treatment. And that's why we keep such a close eye on people that are undergoing different clinical studies. It does take more time, though. I think that's one thing that folks do notice. There's a lot more paperwork. There's a lot more attention being focused on how somebody is doing, their quality of life, any side effects. It might include additional blood tests or scans, and all of these things, may contribute to additional time interfacing with the healthcare system. Bianca, do you want to add anything else to potential benefits or risks for a clinical trial?
I would say for I guess it depends on how you look at it, but once you sign consent to a clinical trial, you are in charge of your care, so you have the say-so as to whether or not you want to withdraw consent, which is a good thing. You want to be in charge of how you receive treatment. So depending on the risks which are listed in the consent form, if some of the risks that are listed on there seem to be something that you don't want to deal with, we can offer either the standard of care treatment or maybe alternative treatments if they're available. So that is something to think about as well.
Exactly. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background in some of the language that we use in developing clinical trials and implementing them. We thought it would be kind of fun to walk through one of them that we're actually conducting here at NYU. As Aaron mentioned at the beginning, my clinical focus is prostate cancer, lung cancer, and CNS or brain and spine cancers. And one of the sites that we see a lot of at our CyberKnife Center is prostate cancer. And one clinical trial that we are developing is using a specific form of high dose radiation to treat prostate cancer quickly in 2 treatments, which is pretty exciting considering maybe 10 years ago, this was taking 44 treatments Monday through Friday to treat patients, and in some locations it still does, but we're trying to bring that treatment down. So this clinical trial is looking at the safety of delivering radiation in 2 treatments, but also kind of including some additional valuable information in personalizing that radiation treatment, including the cancer genetics and the imaging, the MRI of the cancer. So at this point, I'm going to kind of let Bianca take over because she's helped spearhead this clinical trial here at NYU, and she's going to use this as kind of an example to walk you through what it would be like if, for example, you decided to proceed with this clinical trial. And Bianca, if you just let me know when you want me to change slides here, since I'm in the driver's seat.
Okay, so each study has its own processes for enrollment and study procedures. These are just the standard steps a patient would take to participating in a study. So for our study, the first step is obviously speaking with your provider, usually the oncologist or specialist. During the consult visit, the provider will decide whether you are a possible candidate for their trial, and they will give you an overview of it if you're interested. So secondly, if you deem you're interested, you would meet with the research team, in this case it would be me, to review the consent form. The consent form includes a summary of the trial, the procedures that you would have to complete if you consent, and a list of the expected side effects. Our consent form, I believe, is about 8 pages. Depending on the study, it does vary. So the visit itself does take some time just so that you are well informed as to what you're signing consent to. You don't need to sign consent as soon as you receive it. We actually recommend that you do take it home, review it, show loved ones, family, friends. That way you can make a well-informed decision. If you do agree to sign consent, you are in what we call a screening phase. Now the screening phase duration varies according to the study. Some last up to about 28 days. Some can take a few months. For this specific trial, during this time, you may have scheduled procedures such as a biopsy or MRI that you would have to complete. That way we can fully determine your eligibility. During this time, we also collect necessary documentation such as blood work. Again, it's all for eligibility purposes. So once enrollment occurs, after the participant checks all the marks off our eligibility checklist, each study has its own criteria for what makes the patient eligible or ineligible. However, once you're enrolled, you can begin treatment according to the schedule, the specific protocol schedule. The only way to really disenroll from the trial, as I said before, is if you withdraw consent or if the treating physician deems that it's no longer safe for you to continue treatment. So for follow-ups, which would be our final step here, follow-up visits are one of the crucial parts of any study. It allows for us to really gather that data that we need to determine the safety and the feasibility of the study. We look at side effects, long-term and oncologic outcomes post-treatment. So here, when you are signing consent, it's important to remember that you are consenting to participate and attend all those follow-up visits. Obviously, it's hard to say what you're going to be doing 2 years from now, but the hope is that we can follow you on that 3 to 4 monthly schedule, which is the most common schedule you will see for clinical trials. And that way we can collect enough data to push the research forward. Next slide.
So just to add on that, when I see a new patient, that's kind of step number 1 here, and I'm kind of thinking, okay, does this patient fit some of the eligibility for the clinical trial that we're running? So in this case, do they have localized prostate cancer, and is there a possibility they might be eligible? And then I'll reach out to Bianca, who will then kind of conduct the screening activity. So she'll go back to that protocol and she'll review to see if the patient is eligible based on the protocol description. And if that's the case, there will be another very detailed conversation with the patient, including the consent form that we discussed, and then enrollment occurs. And then for follow-up in this case, it's pretty standard follow-up for this particular trial, but every follow-up might be a little bit different. For instance, we do have a little bit extra paperwork just to make sure everybody's feeling okay after the treatment. And so that we have a little bit more data to kind of interrogate and make sure everybody is feeling well.
Okay, so we sort of already touched base on this. This is just our mini overview of the trial. It's a phase 1 study. We are hoping to enroll a maximum of 80 patients over 4 different NYU sites. Again, it's a 2-fraction or 2-session radiation therapy treatment based on the genomic classification for each individual participant for localized prostate cancer. And here we're trying to determine the feasibility and safety of the 2-fraction or 2-session treatment schedule based on any side effects the participant might experience. This trial, we're hoping to enroll patients over the course of 2 years. The 2-year mark for the trial includes follow-up as well. The eligibility criteria list is a little bit longer than this, but just to give you a general idea of what eligibility criteria would look like. For this trial, all of our participants have to be older than 18. They have to be male diagnosed with low to intermediate prostate cancer. And low to intermediate prostate cancer is usually determined based off of biopsy results. So obviously a biopsy report would be included as well in the eligibility criteria. You need to have a prostate size less than 60. And you also need to complete what is an EPIC questionnaire, which is a quality of life questionnaire. The questions that you answer are scored at the end of the questionnaire. We see those scores, and so we would need a reasonable urinary and bowel score in order for you to be eligible. Also, you would need to undergo an MRI as well as agree to use effective contraceptive methods.
So you can see, this is a great example of the things that are happening during the screening phase, so that when Bianca sees a patient, she goes back to the protocol, and then she sees these bullet points. Okay, so is the age correct? Are there very specifics to, let's say, the treatment sites? Is the prostate the right size? Is it the right shape? Very specific patient-related questions to make sure that they're feeling okay and that they would be eligible to undergo the study. There's some extra tests. Sometimes they're extra, sometimes they're standard. And so this just kind of gives you an example of what eligibility criteria is for a given trial. One thing that I want to highlight is the study phase up here. So you might hear this talked about, and I thought I had a previous slide. Let me see if I can go back. I thought it was up here. Maybe I skipped it. Oh, missed it. So clinical trial phases. Actually, well, Bianca, do you want to just talk about that? The different phases, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. You might hear this nomenclature used about trials when you're reading something in a newspaper or seeing something online, but phases are really distinct descriptions of where you're at in that research process. So I'll let you kind of explain that.
Sure. So phase 1 studies essentially aim to test the safety of a new drug or a treatment. It looks at dosing levels of investigational drugs or the drugs that are not FDA approved, and any short-term side effects. So usually those studies have under 100 participants enrolled. For phase 2 studies, they dive a little deeper into treatment that is already being done, but it tries to confirm if that specific treatment is working. It sort of starts asking the questions, does this treatment need a dose modification? If the participants are reacting a specific way, should those modifications be permanent or not? Phase 3 studies are studies that are conducted over longer periods of time, usually over a few years. It allows for researchers to look at the side effects on a long-term basis, and they usually try to enroll over thousands of patients. This is normally one of the last steps that lead towards FDA approval. Phase 4, Dr. Lischalk, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not too familiar with phase 4 trials, but phase 4 trials are usually like the last step before that FDA approval. It's sort of just reinforcing or trying to confirm that the investigational drug is safe for distribution.
Yeah, so you can as you go from phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, what's happening. Phase 4 is actually it's something that never really ends. So you might read in the news that years down the line, sometimes even decades down the line, there's a drug that seems to have some surprising effect, and we decide that we don't think this is a safe drug to give anymore. And so if you have a prescription drug, or sometimes even over-the-counter medications, or different intervention, this really never ends, where we're investigating whether there are problems or side effects with a given treatment. And so that gives you an idea of the progression through for a type of treatment or a drug, from phase 1 to phase 2 when it's phase 4 when it's commercially available. Okay, so this kind of is just a description of the type of treatment we have here. I can talk about this slide. We use a certain radiation machine called CyberKnife, which is essentially a way to deliver high-powered X-rays to a patient's tumor. And this view here gives you an idea of what it looks like inside of the treatment room. And so for this particular trial, we're using this machine to deliver X-rays to prostate cancer, but you can do this for other types of cancers, including early stage lung cancers, for certain types of tumors in the brain. But CyberKnife is a little bit of a misnomer. There's no knife, and it is really just radiation being delivered in a very precise, conformal, reproducible fashion that essentially is like getting surgery, in that you eradicate the tumor cells to the extent that they're completely gone. So it's a minimally invasive approach, and for this particular protocol, we use this machine. And when somebody gets treated, they will lie down on this table here. This looks a little bit more like a chair, but usually this is a flat table, which is connected to this couch. We call it a treatment couch, which adjusts the position of a patient. This is where the radiation will come out, and this is the kind of the machine here, the arm that kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen some of those machines in Detroit that help create cars, but they have all these different degrees of freedom. They can kind of come in and deliver radiation and get to the right angle so that it can avoid normal structures while getting radiation dose into the tumor. So in the example of prostate cancer, get the radiation into the prostate, but avoid the bladder, surrounding bowels, and the rectum, all the organs that are normal. And so that's what this machine is delivering. And during treatment, you can see in the bottom left here, you're constantly monitoring the location of the tumor. So this example is actually one of treating a lung cancer. You can see this is an X-ray, and these are the lungs. But these X-rays are basically obtained using these X-ray panels that go all the way down into the X-ray panel here down on the ground, so that you're constantly getting X-rays to monitor where the radiation is going. And that if there's some surprise and there's some movement, that this machine can actually adjust for that movement continually throughout treatment. And that's actually what has allowed us the ability to deliver such precise radiation that we can decrease the duration of treatment, again, from many, many weeks down to about a week. Okay, so I'll give it back to you, Bianca. You're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So the treatment period for our two-fraction protocol starts off with the pre-screening period that we addressed on earlier. This is where we obtain the consent form. You would sign the consent. We would look at your medical record, which would include PSA collection, other blood work, the baseline questionnaire that I spoke about earlier. We do look at your previous MRI of the prostate, and we also look at your Decipher score. All of this, again, helps to determine eligibility. So once you are enrolled.
Oh, okay. What's PSA collection?
So PSA.
Oh,
yeah, you.
Okay. So this is another example of a test that we would require before we start a trial. So in this case, this is a blood test that we use to see how aggressive a prostate cancer is. But a different example could be if you're undergoing a clinical trial for a lung cancer. The test that's very, very common to get would be a CT scan of the chest. So a PET CT scan. And so there's diagnostic information that's really important for a given type of cancer and a given stage and patient that would be required before you go on to a clinical trial. So in this case, the example of for prostate cancer, we use this particular blood test to kind of help categorize the type of cancer we're dealing with.
I see. Thank you.
So for fractions 1 and 2, those are the 2 treatments that a patient would receive over a course of a week. So for each treatment, the patient will fill out the quality of life questionnaire, which is the QOL assessment, as well as the toxicity assessment. So what's the toxicity assessment? I will meet with the patient just to go over any side effects that they may be feeling. For the first treatment, we obviously don't expect you to experience any side effects, but it's just to gather that baseline as to how you're feeling before you do receive that treatment. That way we know what to compare to post-treatment. So for the first follow-up, we do the same assessments again, the quality of life assessment as well as the toxicity assessments. And then for future follow-ups, we expect to see our patients every 3 to 4 months for a maximum of 2 years. And every 3 to 4 months, we want to have our patients do that blood work again to look at the PSA levels.
So you can see that each time we see a patient on a protocol, there's a lot of really important information that we're going to make sure that we have. And so there's, for example, Bianca, as a patient that's coming through on this protocol, every time they come into our clinic, we'll be getting certain questionnaires to make sure they're feeling okay. They're called quality of life questionnaires, and they ask a lot of different specific questions. I personally will make sure that there's no issues from a side effect standpoint qualitatively. And then during follow-up, the same is true. And you can kind of see how many appointments that this is being assessed at. And this is, again, all established early on before the protocol is even approved within that within the clinical trials office. So a lot of rigorous detail in terms of making sure patients are evaluated clinically at each of these visits. We kind of went past some of these pretty little pictures with all these colors in them, but these are just example pictures of radiation plans. And a lot of folks that don't even get radiation don't ever see this plan, but this gives you an example of what a radiation treatment plan looks like. So this is what we do in our field. We use radiation to treat and cure cancers. In this case, this is a prostate cancer that we're trying to treat and cure here. And to orient you, we're looking at a CT scan here. You can see the gray and the black in the background. This is a CT scan. CT scans are kind of tough to look at because they're basically slices through a person's body, like a 3-dimensional scan, and you're looking at it from the axial plane, which is kind of a bird's eye view. And so you look at them a little bit backwards. This is the right side, this is the left side, this is the front, and this is the back. And depending on where you are in the body, you can see different organs. And this is all the way down in the pelvis. So we can actually see some of the femoral heads here, the right side, the left side. You can see some of the pubic bones and the muscles here. But this right in the middle here is the prostate. This is where the radiation is going. Right behind it is the rectum. And then above and in front is the bladder. And so this gives you a good idea of what we're trying to accomplish with radiation by getting radiation dose into the tumor, which is the prostate, but sparing radiation dose to the rectum and to the bladder. And the other thing you can kind of see here is these different colors. So these different colors are different doses of radiation. So the prescription dose, which is the dose that we basically use to kill the tumor, it's in red here. You can kind of see that. And then everything else is a different color. So everything else is actually a much lower radiation dose, doses that are much lower and don't cause big problems. And that's what we're trying to do with these radiation plans. So they're all personalized to the patient's tumor, to their anatomy, to the rest of the contour of their body. And that's what we're looking at here. This is the actual view. This is a side view here, so it's a different view. And this is a front view when we're looking at this. And so that kind of just gives you an idea of what some of these pictures look like. All right. So, and that is the lecture part of things. Before we take questions, Bianca, did you want to add anything else?
I don't think so. I think that was a pretty comprehensive. I mean, if you guys have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them for you if I can.
I have a question. What was that graph that was on with the
Right?
Uh,
This one right here?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we call a DVH, a dose volume histogram. And so on the bottom here is the radiation dose, and on
Hmm.
the y-axis is the volume. And so
Hmm.
every organ in the area that's being treated is actually what we call contoured, or we draw and identify it. You can kind of see the bladder contour in yellow here.
Hmm.
Um, so all these organs are contoured, and all the areas that we're trying to treat, in this case, the tumor, are also contoured. Um, and um, and then we look at a dose volume histogram to determine if there is a safe amount of or a curative amount of radiation going to the tumor, and simultaneously minimizing radiation to these normal structures. All of these, sorry, in the middle of a lecture. Um, all of these organs that are near where we're treating are going to have certain doses that they can tolerate of radiation. And so this is what we're looking at in this graph.
Oh, cool.
So this is kind of stuff that happens all in the background before you get radiation treatment. And that's true not just of prostate cancer, that's true of lung cancer, brain cancer, really any treatment that's getting radiation. The process of creating a radiation plan is something that occurs. Sometimes it takes a couple of weeks to create a radiation plan. And when we create it, it's done with the help of a radiation therapist to get the planning scans, and also a physicist to help create the plan. So I'm seeing a couple of questions here. So I'm going to we'll try to field these together. There's a question about eligibility for a trial. Okay, so this is a great. Did did somebody have a question they wanted to ask? Okay, so this question about eligibility is really important. About having other types of therapy be done before you get onto a trial. So every cancer site and stage and patient is going to and protocol is going to have very specific eligibility. So, for example, the trial that we just talked about, uh, a patient wouldn't have gotten treatment for prostate cancer before they got on that trial. So that's kind of similar to the question you're asking. You had gotten treatment for this cancer prior to being evaluated for that trial. And that particular trial said that you're not eligible. And that does sometimes happen. But the reverse is actually true too. There are a lot of trials that say, well, you have to have gotten a treatment first, and then you would be eligible for this trial. So it really just depends on the type of trial that you're being evaluated for. The next question is, do clinical trials assess the characteristics of participants such as age, race, weight, other conditions like diabetes, COPD, types of cancer cells? Do these factors have an impact on the effectiveness of treatment on a trial? The short answer to that question is yes. You know, there's a lot of very important characteristics of participants. For instance, on the prostate trial we just talked about, you had to be of a certain age, you had to have a certain type of cancer, so you had to have a localized prostate cancer. And many trials actually require patients to be healthier to be able to tolerate the trial. So let's see, what is the name of the website you mentioned at the beginning of this session? So let me show you. Okay, right at the bottom here, if you can see my cursor, NIH Clinical Trials and You. If you put that into Google, you'll find a lot of the stuff we talked about. They have a beautifully created website that walks you through the bullet points of what a clinical trial is, some of the language that's used, the process. It's a really great resource for you to check out. What is the mortality rate among clinical trials related to the toxic and harmful effect of the drug and procedure? Well, another great question, and it's really going to be dependent on the trial and the kind of cancer or other disease that you're dealing with, and how aggressive you have to be able to combat that. So it's difficult to say across the board. There's a lot of different answers to that question. Bianca, maybe you can take this one. What is the path from product sponsor to the design of a protocol? So what's it look like going from a new device into a protocol if you were going to do that at a research institution like our NYU? Are you muted?
Sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if an external sponsor wants to come and bring a trial at NYU and open up a trial at NYU, they would first have to give us what we would call a regulatory binder. It is essentially a fat binder with a whole bunch of paperwork, starting from their version of the protocol, their version of the consent form, all of depending on the trial, if there's an investigational drug, they would also give us what we would call an investigational brochure, and it's essentially a breakdown of the drug itself, all of the safety features, the risks, the benefits. So any information possible that they can give us, we accept that binder, and then we convert it in with our NYU templates. And from there, it trickles down to all of the departments that I mentioned earlier. So our protocol and development team, it then goes to our DMG groups, which is our data management groups, as well as CTO. And once the IRB approves all of those, all of the paperwork and the protocol itself, then we can start to look at the population that we're going to enroll.
So Barbara has another great question here. Are the results of earlier trials made known to a participant as part of informed consent? Yeah, they should be. This is a great opportunity for you to ask about why this treatment is being ordered, and what else do we know about this type of treatment? Has it been done somewhere else in a different manner? What's distinct about this protocol relative to the historical treatments or trials that have been done in this space? How does that reflect the risks and the benefits to that particular trial? How can we
You're
find
also made aware, oh, sorry. Yeah, you're also made aware of any new risks or new information that come up while the trial is active. Even if you're in follow-up, if something does come up that the IRB would deem important for you to know, you would get some sort of correspondence about it, whether it be in the mail or a phone call. So you would never really be out of the loop with new information.
Great. Another question I'll give to you, Bianca. How do we find out about clinical trials at NYU?
So you can go through NYU and look at the specific disease group. Usually, if you looked at, trying to think of what the name is. I can actually look for the website and put it in the chat for you guys. But if you go through NYU's website, you can actually reach out to the research team for that specific disease group that you're looking for. So let's say if you do have prostate cancer, there is a section on NYU's website where they can get you in contact with the prostate team. So let me actually look for that website and I'll put it in the chat box for you guys.
You can actually directly interface with specific investigators at the institution. And it looks like more generally, how about other hospitals in New York City? You know, I think each institution is probably going to have their own way, but I wouldn't be surprised if other places like Cornell and Columbia had a similar process where you can kind of reach out to their clinical trials office. A good question about placebos are in drug trials, are some patients given placebos? Yeah, so that's typically in a phase 3 or randomized setting oftentimes, where you give a drug, a treatment drug, and then a placebo. And it's typically blinded, oftentimes to both the participant receiving the drug and the doctor or healthcare provider giving the drug. So that is a common thing that you can see, particularly when you're dealing with drugs rather than, you know, different types of new equipment like radiation oncology. I've heard that the cost of trials is government funded so that there is no copay or uninsured cost passed along with the treatment. Is that true? So the cost of a trial, you know, typically the funding for a trial is established before the protocol is even kind of approved. Bianca, do you want to kind of talk about how different protocols are funded and what that means for participants?
Sure. So we do have what I had mentioned earlier with external sponsor protocols. These are usually trials that are funded through outside sources, such as pharmaceutical companies. like Pfizer or Moderna. And those protocols are a little more involved where we are conform to the guidelines of the pharmaceutical companies, since they are the ones funding the trial. We also have what we call investigator-led or investigator-initiated-led trials, and those are in-house protocols. And so sometimes the funding does come in-house. Other times the funding actually is through the insurance, your own personal insurance, whether it be a private insurance or Medicaid or Medicare. It all depends on the trial.
Question from Caroline. 2 questions related to finding clinical trials for rare cancers. Do clinical trials that have already begun typically or ever continue accepting new participants? So great question. You can kind of see from the lecture that we did that at the outset of a trial, you are typically going to establish the number of patients. You can see here with my cursor, the number of patients you're looking to enroll in that trial. So yes, after a trial is opened, you will continue to enroll patients typically until you get to the number here. And this number can actually be adjusted depending on the institution or the organization that's running it. But yeah, so you can still join. It's just a matter of how many more slots they have available for that particular trial. Is there a good resource in searching for clinical trials nationwide? Well, at least for healthcare providers, clinicaltrial.gov is the resource that we use. Bianca, do you know of a patient-centered clinical trial search engine that exists beyond clinicaltrials.gov?
It would probably be through NIH, but I think those, they have only a very specific database. I don't think it would be extremely inclusive. But NIH would probably be my second source if you were looking for different trials.
Those are national organizations, and if you have a protocol, typically you'll register it with clinicaltrials.gov. That's a website that you can kind of search for trials that are open or closed, or you'll get a sense of if they're still enrolling, if they're close to enrollment, if they've reported their outcomes. It's definitely more catered to the investigator, like the healthcare provider, but it's still a good way to kind of search what's out there. All right, any other questions as we come to the last few minutes here? Got one here. Do hospitals cooperate so that they can refer their patients to open trials at another hospital? If so, how is that care coordinated? Great question. You know, that's a tough one for me to answer. I think some hospitals or institutions may not be fully aware of what other research protocols are available at other institutions. Certainly we get referred a lot of patients from other institutions that have heard about our trials. We try to get the word out via the different avenues we have to make our colleagues aware. But you know, is there a system that's in place hospital to hospital that you're aware of? Yeah, that's a great question.
Not that I know of. I think it's a lot of times institutions or the hospitals are made aware of what's going on if they attend things like conferences, or it's a lot of word of mouth. If there is some sort of referral, that's all it really would be, a referral to another hospital. But I'm not sure if there's a streamlined process for that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, we do send out like news alerts for different protocols that are available at NYU to the surrounding area, including other hospitals. So that's one avenue that we kind of try to focus, get some focus on our protocols. Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting us to speak. I hope this was valuable and informative. It's something that Bianca and I are very passionate about, and focusing on kind of pushing the envelope and moving things forward for our patients. And And thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, I think, to maybe Erin, and she can kind of facilitate them our way.